Hello, and welcome everybody to another podcast. Going through and episode 450. There's one on Twitter. It's what I do.
Pretty good. It's really difficult to hear.
Good to hear you're doing well after a difficult Sunday for you on a personal sports level. Hopefully, in all seriousness. All right. Before we get started, I do have to make two announcements. First being that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may watch this podcast. If you are in that fence already, please like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. Strickland also has merchandise, which you can find on our website at www.strick.land. There's a link to the merchandise store. There's all kinds of stuff out there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we've got it. Strickland also has a Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland podcast that I host every Friday with Prez. You also get access to Bozos podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, along with Zach Blatter. And you get access to the Strickland Discord. The conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Roll, my solo pod, where I rant and rave about the Knicks even more. You also get access to wonderful premium articles by Matt and Brandon, one of the best in the business. And you get access to Strictly NFL, which, you guessed it, is a podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Desmond Novak. There are further tiers. There's a $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and $100 tier. That's with a variety of additional benefits, like listening in on pod recordings, merch discounts, and even potentially co-host the podcast alongside yours truly one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not. None of this would be possible without you. And none of this would be possible without BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and number one source for online betting, from the earliest odds to in-game live betting. BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, NHL, to entertainment and political props. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. So the Knicks continued their winning ways. They bounced back after a weird, lethargic start against the Pelicans, and a honestly somewhat disastrous start to the second half against the Pelicans. They win that game 105 to 94. Yeah, I don't know. They're 18-10 now. The defense is looking better. They're up to, I believe, let me just double check this here. The Knicks are up to 13th in defensive rating, I believe. At least per Basketball Reference, that is the case. So that obviously has improved as the season has gone on, and the offense has continued to stay. It's consistently been in that top 3 level. They're tied with Boston for second, 120.4 offensive rating. I don't know. Things are good. And not only did they obviously beat the Pelicans on Saturday, but they absolutely demolished. Absolutely demolished the Timberwolves on Thursday in their reunion face-off against Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. And I kind of wanted to start there because, now that we're about a third of the way through the season, you're starting to get a lot of reports on teams that want to make trades and teams that are unhappy maybe with the status of their team, be it based on moves they made in the offseason, be it the lack of moves made in the offseason, whatever it is. And obviously the Knicks made some significant changes and trades over the last 12 months. Basically, we're a week away from them trading for OG Anunoby, a year anniversary of them trading for OG Anunoby. They traded for Mikal Bridges in the offseason, obviously, right before the offseason officially started. And then they also traded for Karl-Anthony Towns right before the start of training camp this year. And look, I think people, and myself included, have had various reservations about each one of those transactions. And we talked about this on the pod last week, where ultimately the success or failure of these moves will be defined by how this team performs in the postseason over the next however many years. Um, but as things stand, I think most Knicks fans would say they feel pretty good about the current state of the team, the future of the team, how this team is positioned moving forward. Um, Even if obviously we all, I mean, not all, but I think even if there's a legitimate sentiment that, hey, things are good, but we still need another piece or maybe two pieces, whatever, to really solidify ourselves as genuine title contenders. Um, and that's fair. But as we saw in the last two matchups against Minnesota and a team similar to the Knicks, extremely leveraged out in terms of picks, and a Pelicans team which has had a total disaster of a season. Um, it- it's good to be a Knicks fan right now. It is good to be a Knicks fan right now, and it's good to have Leon Rose in charge of this team's basketball operations. Um, and I just think that it's. I mean, those two games in particular really stood out to me in terms of the difference between a team that has a clear identity, that has a roster that makes sense, a roster that you look at the core pieces and you're not worried about how do these players fit next to each other. Like and then you watch that Minnesota game, especially because unlike the Pelicans, they can't even point to like, oh well, we've just had an insane season with regard to injuries. Um, I mean that Minnesota game was very kind of stand out because obviously we make the Carl Anthony Towns trade with them. But now you watch that team and you're like, this doesn't none of this really seems to maximize. Like it's they have talented players, but they don't really amplify each other. And then, the real central issue that we have is what what on this roster exists in a way that gets the best out of Anthony Edwards, either be it in the right here and now, or in the future as they look to continue to build around Edwards. And you compare that obviously to how the Knicks have built around Jalen Brunson, and it couldn't be more of a stark difference. And not just the Edwards piece of it, but you kind of look at how Minnesota's operated over the previous, throughout the time that Towns was there. He was there for 9 years. I don't think it's unfair to say this, but the Knicks have done more to maximize, complement, however you want to phrase it, Karl Anthony Towns in 3 months than Minnesota did for 9 years. And obviously there's a financial component to the trade, with regard to the second apron and blah 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 blah. But I think the difference in the organizations can be summed up with looking at the most significant trade either team made. And that, obviously, in the case of the Knicks, in my opinion anyway, is the Mikal Bridges trade, where you traded out all your future first round picks, you traded out a protected first from the Bucks, et cetera, for this complementary wing player who, I mean, I think it's safe to say that he can divide opinion at times. And there are people who think he is a star. There are people who think he's nothing more than a role player. And obviously, the start that he had in New York was not ideal, but you're starting to see exactly why the Knicks made this trade, why they went to acquire this player. And then you compare that to Minnesota, where, yeah, look, Rudy Gobert is a good player. Rudy Gobert helped them get to a Western Conference Finals last year, but Rudy Gobert also cost them Karl Anthony Towns in a lot of ways. And that is a very interesting dichotomy between how the Knicks have kind of pushed their chips in at this point, but they've done it in a way where the players they've acquired are here to build with and around Jalen Brunson, and should not cost. They're very unlikely to need to make some cost-cutting maneuvers that lose a core player for them, whereas Minnesota just had to they just did the Towns trade in large part because they could not continue to pay, I guess, or their ownership felt they couldn't continue to pay an exorbitant luxury tax bill and the second apron concerns they had. And that cost them, I think a piece that they're now fully understanding was, I mean, they probably underestimated how important Karl Anthony Towns was to maintaining the balance, and kind of just giving them a different element to their offense and their roster construction, um, than they currently have. Because as talented as Julius Randle is, we all know his flaws and his strengths. He does not complement Anthony Edwards in the same way that Karl Anthony Towns did. He doesn't fit next to Rudy Gobert in the same way that Karl Anthony Towns did. And, the argument that they needed somebody who could create offense aside from Edwards is fair. But I think it also, it was too reductive in what Karl Anthony Towns provided for them. And I'm pretty unsure of where they go from here. I don't know what their pivots are. I don't know how they're going to get the pieces they need. But I do want to thank them for giving us Karl Anthony Towns.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little unfair to say they did nothing to build around him. I think it can be a little difficult to build around a player who he's a big, but he doesn't provide rim protection, right? And he's not quite really the only player that's you want at the highest level like that is Jokic, and that can make it a tricky fit with Towns. I think it actually ended up working really well when they brought Rudy, right? You can see the ratings with them on the floor together, and they went to the Western Conference Finals. So I think that's a little bit unfair, and they brought in obviously.
I didn't say they did nothing. I said that they did less, and I stand by that because they made that trade to play Cat at the 4. So they basically were like, we don't care that you're awesome at the 5. We're committing to you playing at the 4 full time.
But he's quite good in that role too.
But you want to play him at both spots. That's not how you maximize the player. I mean, I think it's completely. I mean, we've talked about this. The reason why, there's kind of like, should we not? What is Mitchell Robinson worth? Like in terms of trading him, one of the arguments for trading him or for keeping him is, hey, you want to have that option of playing big, right, with Cat at the 4 and Mitchell Robinson at the 5. So I totally understand the appeal of getting a center who you can protect the rim, protect Cat in a lot of ways defensively. I understand why you want that option. I just don't know why you make a trade at that price point, which basically locks in Cat at the 4, because once you pay that price for somebody, right, they basically have to play. And you can't obviously play a Rudy in any other position than the 5.
And they hamstrung themselves financially in ways. I think someone mentioned that Rudy and Cat both making All NBA. Those bonuses, that extra cash, really was kind of the final nail in the coffin there. And they through being bad, they were able to get a superstar guard to play with Cat, but wasn't the cleanest fit, right? I think Ant is still developing as a player. I actually think his passing has improved quite a bit, but bringing it every session on defense, I think it's fine. I mean, look at Brunson's early playoff numbers, and then it takes everyone a while to get adjusted to playoff basketball, and Ant has been inconsistent a little bit there. But I think to get at what you're saying, I think the Knicks did a lot of their work ahead of time, right? It was kind of like they were preparing all that time. We were like, they brought Leon not to develop and draft and play Moneyball. They brought him to get stars, right? World Wide West and all this, agents connections, right? And I think, the star trade was coming, but they did so much work ahead of time. You get a guard who was ready to be the franchise player before you make that trade. And so that takes some pressure off Cat. You have a sound defensive coach who's worked with a lot of stars, whose rep, I think, seems to, every time I hear players actually talk about him that have played for him, it goes very much against the polls that you see. It's like, who's the least likely coach you'd want to play for, right? That goes for even guys who used to play for him, who don't play for him anymore. you build you build in the flexibility that they had financially. You build in the the stockpile of draft picks and assets they had, how the careful management, right? So they did a lot of their work ahead of time, as opposed to Minnesota. Kind of they had to tank to get Cat, right, or to get Ant. Um, they had to they created these circumstances not with meticulous preparation and all of that. They kind of walked into those things, and I think it's a good argument for the kind of organic team building the Knicks have engaged in, as opposed to serial tanking. Now, of course, can that work? Yeah, you're seeing that in Oklahoma City. They had a bunch of stars. They turned them into lots of assets. They get SGA. They tank and tank and tank until they have this insane roster. And there'll be Piper to pay eventually. Chet will have to get paid. I don't think Hartstein on that contract can stay with them long term.
Well, he's also not good, right? That's the other problem they have with him.
Fart and shit, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
But it speaks to vindication for Leon Rose's team philosophy. Is that going to get them a title like we talked about? I don't know. I think the pushback I would have is that without being a great rim protector, it's not quite as tricky a fit as a guy like Julius Randle. And Cat, I think he deserves the most praise. I think the defensive numbers are not great with him, but he's done everything you could have asked. Besides being 7 feet tall with like long arms like Mitchell Robinson, he's generally in the right spot. Tibbs has adapted the pick and roll coverages to account for the fact that he's not great in drop. Makes the rotations. Yeah, there's bouts of these silly fouls, but they're not as prevalent as they are in the past. He's really bought in, and he deserves credit for that. And the last thing I'll say is, culture is a very overused word. The Knicks have the culture to make their front office right. Um, they will, they've made trades in the past, and Tibbs has generally figured out a way to make it work. Made the Derrick Rose trade work. That one looked like a heist. Sometimes it doesn't work out, right? You have the Cam Reddish trade, but the front office, when it takes a swing, and even the Brunson move was viewed as many as risky, right? You're paying at the time uh, like above average point guard salary for a guy who had not been the lead guy in that way. When you have a good culture, you make the front office right. They made the front office right with OG, and then this Mikal Bridges trade. Maybe it'll end up going down as an overpay, but they so far they've done a good job of making the front office right, and that speaks to culture that comes from the top, and it comes from within the locker room. I don't think he was. I hope this is not 100% what they were saying to Bridges when he was struggling, but Cat talked about, it's on us. It's not on him that he was struggling. We have to make things easier for him. We have to put him in better positions. We have to find him, right? I think if you look at the way Bridges has adapted himself, I doubt that was the only message being sent in the locker room. I'm sure a lot of it was, you have to kind of meet us halfway. But it speaks to kind of that attitude and that mentality. Like, we're not detached from the front office. We're all one and the same. And it's a little bit in stark contrast to, I don't want to come down hard on Anthony Edwards or anything, but the comments he's made and the frustrations, it kind of speaks to, and I think their culture in Minnesota is good. I mean, last year you saw they really played hard together. You see, they still have a lot of love for Cat. Ant was speaking very glowingly about how happy he is for Cat, having success.
A little too glowingly for my liking.
Gobert and Cat are still close, right? So, I think Cat deserves credit, right? I mean, he could have easily thrown up a stink having to move to the 4 when they made that trade for Gobert. That speaks to his selflessness as a player and how much he's grown, I think, from his earlier clashes with Butler and Tibbs. But it kind of speaks to what a different place those organizations are in. And the last thing I'll say is, there was, I think it was Dane Moore who was talking about 6 months ago, and Dane Moore is the beat writer. Is it The Athletic or?
No, he's like does like a Wolves podcast, and he kind of has his own. It's like what Knicks Fan TV, KFS, us, like same concept.
Okay, well, he seems to be. I enjoyed following his breakdowns. If you want to go rewatch the game and from a Wolves perspective and see kind of why it was such a blowout. But one thing that he brought up after the game is that, if you'd asked me last year, 6 months ago, right, does Chris Finch hold his players accountable? That would have been an unquestionable yes. Now, from what I'm hearing, it doesn't seem like that. And there is one big change. And the last team that this guy played on, look, we've seen it in podcasts, right? Like Theo Pinson said, if you want to play for Tibbs, you got to play D, except if you're Randall. So a coach who's generally known for holding players accountable. Now you see that's changed. Is that all because of Julius Randle? I don't know. But I know that in this locker room, I think the fact that the Bridges trade is now starting to look probably still like an overpay. You pay that much for a non-all-star or a non-star, it's going to look like that. But it's starting to look like, all right, but they got a good player. Maybe it's an overpay, but somebody who really helps this team. And that doesn't always work out that way. And maybe there's still a long way to go, but it shows you how different a place, not just these on the court players are, but these two organizations are.
Yeah. And, to go back to the cat thing you mentioned about selflessness and whatnot, I think that's probably where I'm not going to say the Knicks don't get enough credit, because I feel like that's all we do in this podcast. Like, oh, Leon Rose deserves credit for this. Leon Rose deserves credit for that. But like, I don't think it's appreciated necessarily. Certainly not outside of Knicks fans. Just like how much synergy and personalities and not just like, yeah, these guys make sense on the floor together, but also how do these guys come together in the locker room? How how are they going to balance their egos? Because look, everybody in the NBA to some degree has an ego, right? I mean, you're gonna have an ego if you're a professional athlete. And how can they? How are they? How do we assemble a team where these guys aren't going to clash? They're going to be able to put those things aside and be greater than the sum of their parts. And you know, we've seen this throughout NBA history, right? Where you have a star, you go get another star, and there's like a betting in period where they're trying to figure out how to play off of each other. But also, it's like the whole dick measuring contest of like whose team is it, right? And throughout this season, even early on when the Knicks were up and down and not consistent, and honestly, I still think they have like these inconsistencies in them at times. Like, I mean, the Pelicans game is a really good example of it, right? Where you're like, for the first 2.5 quarters, you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
But do you think that speaks to the season long? To me, that was just they came off a very emotional win. The player
I
at the
also think the
center of
Pelicans played well. I think the
I mean,
Pelicans played.
they just took the Nuggets to overtime, by the way, the day after that game. So they're
Yeah,
like they
they're
have some
playing
talent
hard,
even with injuries,
and I think they're playing hard. I think that they look. They're what are they like 5-23 or 24 or something like that. This is a team that had expectations coming into the season of being a legit playoff contender in the West. Now that they have more of their pieces back, I think they know, right, that like, hey, we've probably got like the next month here to make some kind of push, and if we don't, then we could start seeing a fire sale. There'll be changes made, whatever it is. And so, like, I think you're getting that real top end effort from them overall. That being said, yeah, like, I mean, I think you can't expect teams to be robots and just perform consistently every single night for 4 quarters the exact same way, right? That's not realistic. But I think the Knicks, we've seen like them have these weird letdown games. That's been less frequent lately. But even amidst, early season inconsistencies and whatever, there was never really like, I don't even remember any point where I was watching it and I was like, I don't know, it feels like Brunson is trying to take over here and he's not really interested in getting Cat going, or Cat is trying to make this his team or anything like that. Like, I just don't think that never happened. Like the first thing that Cat said when he got here is like, he's calling Brunson the Cap and all that shit, and it's like corny and funny, but I think that type of mentality, that type of energy, is why this has worked, or why it has worked so well so early on. And you look at a guy like Mikal Bridges, who, yeah, look, he obviously has had very different roles in his career, going from what he was initially in Phoenix to how he was kind of developing into a second, third type of option in his final stretch in Phoenix, and then he gets traded to Brooklyn, and now all of a sudden they're giving him number one type usage and touches, and now it's he's back to kind of like that what he was turning into his final years in Phoenix, where it's like, hey, we need you to be this third guy, and we need you to defend a point of attack at a high level. We need you to play off of these two with gravity, and there's an adjustment period for him, and I think we're still going to see games where we're like, not really getting him involved enough, but like the willingness that you see, and just like the lack of any type of behind the scenes, like, Bridges isn't happy, or like this is a real problem that's developing, and all that type of shit. That speaks to the type of personalities and whatever that Leon has targeted. I mean, I think Deuce McBride went on some podcast a couple of days ago, and they asked him about, look, we've all joked about the contract he's on, how it's a steal, how like, Leon robbed him and whatever. And he was like, look, I'd get paid a lot of money to play basketball with the Knicks on a really good team. I think he's like, there are plenty of people that have it worse than me. This is great. I don't care. And I think targeting those type of personalities, and it's pointed, right? I mean, this is work that has been done over the course of years at this point, right? In terms of like even guys that have left, in terms of Emmanuel Quickly or an Obi Toppin and whatever, what even if they had issues with their role and usage and whatever behind the scenes, it didn't really manifest on the floor ever. And then when in cases where maybe that was coming to a head, right, the Knicks made moves to get those guys to places that were more suited to them, while also obviously getting things back in return that they valued. So right, so it's like, okay, we're not going to pay Emmanuel Quickly starting point guard money because we have Jalen Brunson, and RJ Barrett's not happy being a third option. Okay, well, we're going to trade you to a team that likes both of you guys. It's going to use both of you guys in the exact roles that you want to play, and we'll get OG and Obi. And Quentin Grimes is unhappy about coming off the bench and having a more minimized role. Okay, well, it's time for him to go. Obi Toppin is miserable because he knows that there's no path for him to play serious minutes because Julius Randle is on the roster. Okay, well, it's time for you to go to Indiana, who plays the. I mean, was there ever any doubt like that Obi was going to play better in Indiana given their play style? No, it was like obvious that was a great situation for him. And the list goes on. I mean, even small stuff, right? Like, Shake Milton, come sign with us for the rest of the season. And by the way, we're going to get you $3 million next year to exist as like a human trade exception for Mikal Bridges. Bojan Bogdanovic, hey, we want you to be here for a year. And by the way, we're going to pick up your option for $19 million and trade you out to Brooklyn to, again, human trade exception for Mikal Bridges. Like, it's about treating people well also, right? And, all these guys that have been, and obviously, you stay in the job long enough, you're going to trade players, you're going to let guys walk. Have you heard a single guy come out after they've left the Knicks? And think about this. This is the Knicks we're talking about. Since they've left the Knicks and had anything bad to say about the organization? I don't remember.
There was the Dante saying, "This is what happens when you let me run the show." There was Grimes like talking shit, but I think what Grimes actually said after being traded was a little bit more complicated.
That's my point. Talking shit on the floor is not the same thing. That's a totally different dynamic. But you have not heard. Dante came out before the game we played again on Thursday, and he's like, no, I love those guys. I root for them. Whatever. Like RJ Barrett probably was like the closest one, and even
that
what
seemed
he said,
more of a Randall thing than a Tibbs thing, right?
Like, yeah, and what he said is mostly like he kind of knew his time in New York was ending.
Well, he said, I think the thing that stuck out to me was like, when no one's getting you the ball, you don't want to cut, right? Which again you can see the same coach. There is a lot more cutting and ball movement. There is still a lot of isolation, but people, Bridges is thriving, right? So it clearly wasn't a Tibbs thing. It that seemed to me a little bit more. Right? You're seeing it again, right? So
yeah, and so like I think it speaks to the overall job Leon's done, where the image of the organization has changed and how they value players has changed. The way they treat people, while they're here, on the way out, whatever. That is clearly at a place. I'm not going to say I don't know how I can't speak to saying I don't think the Knicks were like necessarily treating everybody horribly before Leon Rose got here, but I think it's obvious that the way he operates, it curries favor among players and agents, I'm sure, because he does make sure to work with guys and he gets you a little paycheck maybe on the way out the door if you play ball with him. And, you know, all of that has led to a team that is synergistic, that plays for one another, that has good energy. And again, like in terms of synergy, I think there's small stuff you see too where it's like, okay, we traded for Mikal Bridges. Let's we and now we need to find ways to get depth at you know bargain basement prices because we don't really have any other avenue to do it. Okay, let's go get Campaign. This is a guy who's played with Mikal Bridges, so we have an idea of how these guys play off of each other. I'm sure that they had reporting, or not reporting, but intel on his personality and all that type of stuff. Okay, yeah, we like Campaign. Let's go get Campaign. And also, this is a player. If I know for a fact the Knicks were interested in him back in the 2021 offseason when he re-signed with Phoenix. So it's not a player. It's a player that they've had some interest in previously. And then, oh, okay, let's go get Landry Shamet because, this is another guy we know Mikal Bridges has played with. We need a wing shooter off the bench. Okay, cool. I think like these small details in terms of not just getting depth, but the players you're getting and kind of how these pieces fit. I mean, we've seen it with Brunson, right? Where it's like, okay, we're going to trade for Josh Hart. Oh, we're going to sign Dante DiVincenzo. We're going to trade for Mikal Bridges, where it's like, I mean, it became a meme, but there is something to the idea of like, if guys are happy playing with one another and that they play off of each other well, um, that's probably there's value to that, especially in a league where it feels like guys are constantly moving around and changing scene and looking for a bigger role, an opportunity to maybe get a bigger payday and whatever. If guys are happy in their work situation and they like their coworkers and teammates in this situation, they're probably less inclined to want to leave. And obviously, key to that is you can't just be a team where everybody's friends and you suck ass. That doesn't work either. But they're good. So like it's all of these kind of rising tides working together. And then you compare it to a team like Minnesota where you're like, you know, did the Cat Gobert thing work? Sure, yeah, it worked. But it never, I mean, their offense was never particularly good. I think they were 17th in offensive rating last year. They never had a point guard, right? So they didn't really address that need. I mean, I know Mike Conley is, he's fine, but he's old, right? He's not what he
I
was.
mean,
So
it was shocking because I feel like he's killed us so many times in the past in places like Utah, Memphis. Just I forgot he was in the game for like most of it. And I remember before the game, I was like, "Oh, Conley's there. That's an interesting matchup with Brunson." I mean, obviously, I probably was just being overly fearful, but yeah, it's kind of sad to see how invisible he was, at least in that game, compared to how good of a player he was.
yeah, and it's just like when you see that, and it's like it's one thing to not have everything figured out, but when you've pushed in all your chips, when your pieces don't fit together, and you still have major needs, that's I mean that speaks to a I don't want to even say haphazard, but a poorly it's
planned.
yeah, poorly planned is probably that's probably not a great plan that has been executed. And then you look at the Pelicans, and obviously the injury stuff with them is a valid kind of pushback on why they're struggling. But I think even at full health, they don't have their pieces they don't fit together well, right? Like, okay, yeah, you needed a point guard. DeJounte Murray gives you a point guard, and I get that, but if everybody was healthy, I don't like that fit between him and Ingram and Zion. It's like I think that just doesn't make sense. And then they have weird stuff going on where at full health, Trey Murphy's coming off the bench. This is a guy you just gave $150 million to. Why is he coming off the bench? It's like incomplete. It's an incomplete construction of a roster. And David Griffin took over basically a year. He took over a year before Leon Rose did. And he had the fortune, right, of landing a number one pick, getting this trade with the Lakers for Anthony Davis, where he got a bunch of pieces and picks, and then he traded Drew Holiday and got more picks from Milwaukee, and then you kind of like look at all of these assets he's had and the time he's had, and this is the sum total of his work, and you're like, I think it really puts into light how, has Leon Rose been perfect? No, because it's impossible to be perfect in any job, but definitely in a job like building an NBA team. But he's consistently found a way to win on the margins and improve the roster. And then he bided his time, right? Because obviously, when are the Knicks going to make a big move? When are they going to make a big move? And he took his time and was patient before pushing in those chips. And he did it in a pointed way, right? Like the Knicks didn't trade out any of their future picks. I mean, I guess they traded a future one for Josh Hart, but that was a little bit different. But they didn't trade. They had all of their first round picks moving forward at the end of last season, right? And once he decided it was go time, it was like, all right, well, I'm gonna go get Mikal Bridges because I want another 3-and-D wing and a guy that can space the floor and cut and all these things. And I gotta say, man, like, you've mentioned this before too. The Cat trade is, I mean, kind of given the circumstances, right, where Hartenstein leaves because of, he got an offer that the Knicks could not match. So he's gone. Mitchell Robinson is out injured. And then, your options at that point are going to be start Precious and have Precious and Jericho Sims be your center platoon until Mitchell Robinson gets back, which he's still not back yet. And we're going to play Julius Randle some at the 5. To be in that circumstance where you've cashed in your chips or the majority of your chips, and you still have this glaring hole at center. I mean, we're on the cusp of the season, and we were like, I guess Randall at the 5. We're trying to talk ourselves into it, right? And then you take the chance on Karl Anthony Towns on a contract that a lot of people around the league did not think was good, and honestly, they might still not think it's good for all I know. But you kind of pull this rabbit out of the hat, and all of a sudden your roster, your starting 5, you have a legitimate center who, yeah, look, he's not perfect defensively. We all know that. We know that he's got issues, and he's never going to be the greatest defensive big of all time, but he can actually credibly defend at the position. And he competes. He tries. He's also been a fantastic rebounder. He's the best rebounder in the league right now. And to kind of like pull that out right on the eve of the season, I mean, it's kind of like manna from heaven, as the great Rob Pelinka once said about signing KCP. It's pretty incredible, and it completes their roster in a way that it felt incomplete before, right? Because before the season, we're all like, yeah, Randall's going to play some 5, but we need a center. Like, we can't, like, this cannot just be like the Precious Achiuwa, Mitchell Robinson hopes he stays healthy show at that position. And look, I just think it's, and again, when you play those two teams back to back, it really drives home like how well put together this roster is, and how, in terms of timing, like he's managed to pull off big moves at points where it felt like the Knicks needed to make big moves, right? Like, I loved Quickly, and I know you did too. And RJ Barrett. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I was his biggest fan, but you draft a kid 3rd overall, and you see him kind of develop, and you're kind of always hoping that he's going to turn the corner, right? It's right around the corner, the next step. But it was getting to a point where you could tell that the situation was not tenable with all the minutes and how everything had to go around. And it's like, okay, well, this is it. Like, we got to make a move. We got to address this logjam. We got to kind of fill, we need to get bigger on the wing, right? Because we just have 50 million guards. And they make that move. And it's like, okay, well, we had a really good season. How do we position ourselves? How do we want to just run it back, or should we take a shot on trying to push our ceiling even higher? And it's like, all right, well, we're going to go get Mikal Bridges. And, oh, shit, we need a center. All right, well, we're going to go get Karl Anthony Towns. And it's, I think it's easy for teams to identify what they need. Actually executing and getting and addressing those needs that's the hardest part, right? That's the part where every team has issues. Like, and again, Minnesota and New Orleans, you see that very pointedly, where it's like, even with attempts they've made to address the situations that they know that or the problems they have, they don't still have answers at those positions. Like point guard, right, for Minnesota specifically, you're able to get the stopgap Conley move, which was pretty brilliant maneuvering by Finch at the deadline in 2022. But like that was a stopgap. So your long-term solution is still not there. And then they make the move this offseason for Rob Dillingham, where they trade out their remaining future first-round capital in terms of a 2031 unprotected pick and a 2030 pick swap. And Dillingham's not even playing. He barely played. And I mean, I'm not sure if you were into Rob Dillingham coming out of college, but like even if
Rez was.
yeah, even if you like him, I think it's
I mean, I liked him too, but
but I think it's fair to say, like, even if you liked him or you do like him or whatever, it's not some certainty that he's going to hit the level that you need and address what they need at that starting point guard position. So like and you're now at a point where they're not some rebuilding team, right? They're not like, oh, we can be patient and kind of slow play this. No, you're in go time, and they're in go time, and they still got a lot of issues with that team. And then, obviously the Pelicans, we don't even need to go into all the problems they have, but like, and they've let issues linger into the season, right, with the Brandon Ingram thing and whatever. And like, I don't know, it just once you kind of are in the position where you have players good enough to win, or you at least feel that way, it's really important to like figure out the roster around them. And I think it's pretty easy to say Leon Rose has done that. But there are a lot of GMs around the league that fail. I mean, shit, the Knicks failed for 20 fucking years before Leon Rose got there, both in terms of getting star talent and putting pieces around star talent.
Yeah, I mean, you can bring in the Kings as an example as well. Of a team, and I think it's fair to also say, and people will say that you just have less flexibility for maneuvers when you're in these small markets. You're not going to be a big time free agent destination. But I also think I'll reiterate this point. When you draft a guy when you rely on getting stars high in the draft, right, and make that the centerpiece of your team, that's an interesting juxtaposition to the route the Knicks have taken, right? Because look at the process, for example, right? You draft Ben Simmons was a great talent, very, very talented player. You make him the centerpiece of your franchise, along with, again, another young player, supremely talented in Joel Embiid. There were issues, right? Those are the center of the franchise. There are going to be growing pains, right? Things like Ben Simmons having to develop more of an offensive game, scoring game, I should say. Joel Embiid bringing that consistency, staying healthy, those kind of things. When you grow through that with those guys as your centerpiece, and then you try to plug holes with vets, it can cause issues. Now, the good thing is you have them on rookie contracts, so you can, you have some cap flexibility. But that is one approach to team building. The Knicks have gone the other way, where there hasn't been a rookie or a young player that's been depended on to be the star to carry the team, right? You want to thank Julius Randle for that? You should, because it prevented the Knicks from having to rely on RJ more quickly once he really established himself to that level. You can argue maybe they should have, but there's growing pains that come with just handing over the keys to a young guy, because they're still developing. Look at Cat, right? Cat will be the first to tell you that early in his career, both on the court and off the court, there was maturity. I mean, you look at the guy now, and he always says the right things. Clearly has a really good relationship with Tibbs. That wasn't the case early in his career. Clashed with another star player, right? Had to deal with being a 21-year-old who's expected to carry a franchise on his shoulders. We saw that with Porzingis, right? When he was here. The way he approaches the game, both again on the court and off the court, is very different than when he was in New York. No, it wasn't quite his fault necessarily. He was 21. I mean, you see that. So people are quick to say just tank and get a high pick, and it's going to solve all your problems. New Orleans, right? How did they get Anthony Davis? Tanking, right? You get this guy, and again, a guy who had to mature early in his career. He was thought to be this defensive prospect. It took him a while to really become great on defense.
Chris Paul too, by the way, before that.
Yeah, Chris Paul, they tanked, right? So you're now your clock, and this is what Minnesota's going through a little bit because Anthony Edwards isn't quite there yet to be the franchise savior. And then you make these risky moves around them. But if you're getting guys that aren't, who can't take that role, whereas now, you look at the Knicks, you've said this, right? They tend to target guys who are 25, 26. They build through the draft, right? But quickly, we all think he should have started. But even if he started that year, it was Randall's team, right? And then after that, still RJ's team. It's certainly for the first year. They then get Brunson, 25, 26-year-old guy. You bring in Cat now as the other star, 28, 29. So these younger guys can actually just grow, but they're not, your franchise isn't dependent on them in the same way, which creates a lot of pressure on them, creates a lot of pressure on the org to get all of those things right, because your star is not a true star. Let me ask you this, can you think of a guy under 25 who won the championship as a team's best player? The greatest of all time took 6 years?
How old was Wade? Wade's probably the one, right?
Oh, he still had Shaq, but Wade was the unquestioned best player. But
they had Shaq, which I mean, it's so that's kind of think about that, right? That's what you needed to.
I mean, it wasn't the same Shaq, but he still, I think, finished in MVP.
I mean, he was still really good that year. It was, he wasn't, obviously peak Shaq, but good Shaq was still pretty good at basketball.
And even Wade was a late entrant, so by the time he
was an older rookie.
Yeah, he was. They were in 2006. He was 24, and it was a 2005, 2006 season. But other than that, especially and we've had some generational prospects, right? LeBron didn't win until later. Anthony Davis didn't win until he joined LeBron. He's only won one. Jokic was older, right? Steph Curry. I mean, part of that was injuries early in his career, but the first time they won it in 2014, 2015, 26, 27, right? So if you just asking the star when they're younger to be that guy is tough. And I also think a lot of teams are scared that we want to cater to this. We have this star 20, 21-year-old. We should cater to them. We don't want to bring in another guy and hurt his development. It's tough just with that model. I think you're better off probably bringing in like the Heat did, bringing in a guy who can share the load, right? Which a lot of these teams, frankly, have struggled with.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Minnesota thing is so. I didn't like the Gobert trade in real time, not just because of the price they paid, but what I didn't really like is I think Edwards had just finished his second year. They had made the playoffs. They had made the first round. They lost in 6 games to Memphis in the first round. Pretty competitive series. Honestly, at points in that series, if you go back and look at those games, they could have easily won it. Maybe should have won it. But I didn't like that. It was okay, Anthony Edwards is really good. Let's immediately make this trade, and now the burden of offensive creation falls basically entirely on him because Mike Conley is older. He can organize your offense, and that is valuable, but he's not creating very dynamically. He's not getting into the paint consistently. So you put this entire onus of offensive creation on Edwards. And look, I think it's fair to be critical of him. And I personally, I think that
the idea was probably Towns could share some of that load too, right? So
yeah, but I mean, in terms of initiation, it's just different. And I think some of the conversations that Edwards has been put in over the last couple of years, where it's it's top 5 player, he's going to win the MVPs, and he's an MVP.
I still saw an article from last year where it was a star who in the mold of MJ and Kobe. It's that's a lot to put on a guy. I mean, I can see why people say these things, but
I think it's if you're just looking at he's a high flyer and he's a wing, and you kind of get all that, but it's
he has that mentality, that attitude, right?
Yeah, and I'm long term, I think that stuff is still potentially on the table for him, right? In terms of being a number 1 lead guy on a contender and improving as a playmaker, reading defenses better. All that stuff is, it took Tatum how long before he leveled up as a playmaker, and he still has issues sometimes, with his, getting into the paint and creating all that stuff, whatever. But it takes time, especially for wings, right? Because they don't come in with that kind of they haven't been running offense for their entire careers and lives. It's a different thing. And so I think that stuff is potentially still on the table for Amp, but they immediately made that no, we need you to make that leap now. It has to go right now. And I was never I thought that was a mistake. I did not like that. And you know, again, they also never got a real point guard, or they haven't gotten a real quality point guard to play alongside him. So it's kind of now with Cat gone and their spacing is much worse. It puts puts kind of his issues under a greater microscope. And I think one good thing the Knicks have done is like I don't, you know, I wouldn't say they've necessarily built through the draft. But I think they have valued the players they have picked, and they've given them all of them time to develop and find a role and a niche on the team. And um, I don't think for me, this is just me. I never felt like when are the Knicks going to make a big move? When are they going to make a big move? When are they going to do it? Like I don't think you put a timeline on that necessarily. I think you have to understand where your team is and then be comfortable making big moves, pushing in chips and whatever. And they never jumped the gun on that. Like to me, it feels like you look at other teams, and sometimes I think they jump the gun and push chips in before it makes sense, or they push the chips in on the wrong guy, um, and their roster isn't complete, and whatever. The Knicks, more or less, I mean, this Cat trade did save them in some ways. Um, some of that was circumstances out of their control, right, with Hartenstein leaving and Mitchell being hurt, whatever. But like they have consistently made these moves at points in time where it made sense and where
And
it
they've
lined
allowed themselves the flexibility to do that, right? They don't
right
act before they need to in that sense.
and it's they've made these moves when it lines up with where they are as a team. Like, oh, okay, like once right, okay, 2021-22, that season is kind of it's a step back and whatever. Okay, we need to go get a point guard. Let's a real point guard, right? We did like the all right, let's take a shot on Kemba thing and Derrick Rose and whatever. No, let's address this position. Okay, look, we're gonna go sign Jalen Brunson. Obviously, we know that Leon Rose has known Jalen Brunson his entire life, so there's a lot more there than just like, oh, we just need a point guard. Let's get Jalen Brunson. This is somebody that they knew intimately and probably better than anybody else in the NBA. Even
Intimately, yeah.
yeah, and probably even better than Dallas knew him. So they get him, and that obviously helps boost the team. It makes life easier for Julius Randle, right? That was up to that point Julius Randle's best season of his career. Um, and you know, in the meantime, you've got guys like okay, Quentin Grimes is now ready to take this starting role. Emmanuel Quickly is now a legitimate six man of the year. Probably he's a starting caliber player coming off of our bench. Deuce McBride, we like him. We think he's ready to play some nominal rotation minutes. And then that season, things are good, and it's like okay, we think maybe we can make a move that gives us a little bit more depth and makes us better. Okay, let's get Josh Hart for a price that makes sense, right? A first round pick. Okay, great. And then it's like okay, now, how do
Hartenstein.
we? Yeah, and then well, they had signed Hartenstein the year before, but that was another one too, where it was like, okay, I think the two biggest needs the Knicks had at that point that were very, very obvious during that 2021-22 season was point guard and then backup center, and Hartenstein filled that need. And it's like, okay, now things are good, but oh shit, now we have too many guys, and we're getting close to like Emmanuel quickly needing a new contract, and RJ Barrett has his extension, but he's not super thrilled. And all right, now let's go get OG Anunoby. It makes sense now to do this, right? And okay, we have a good season, but we still don't. I mean, we talked about it after they lost to the Pacers. We could use another wing defender. We could use like more there. Okay, now let's go get Mikal Bridges.
Well, I
Okay,
think you specifically talked about Dante, right? And like, can you close games with him as good as he is with that lack of
yeah,
upside?
I like Dante a lot, obviously, but I think that one, you got the best season of his career. I'll be shocked if he ever has a season quite like that again. I think everything was lined up for him perfectly, and he was in a really good mental space with his best pals, and that makes all the difference in the world. Um, but yeah, like I did not think that him and Brunson was a viable backcourt for a contender defensively. And okay, so you get Bridges, and then okay, now we need a center because all this shit. All right, let's go get Cat. This is a guy that we've liked forever, right? We know that the Knicks have liked him for a long time, and
it helps you avoid a bet. Whatever. I think you tweeted this yesterday. Randall's probably going to end up having to pick up the option, but
yeah,
it
that was
saves you
underrated.
that uncertainty, and then it also saves you the uncertainty that we had one of the biggest kind of just inflection points that we just didn't know, right? Was, can this guy show up the way we need him to in the playoffs? That was the other kind of question that you have a more stable answer to. I mean, people talk all day about Cat's playoff performances. Was good last year in first career, 18 and 10 on 58 true shooting. So to your point, yeah, like that was, but I think, they kind of, because they didn't make the moves that people people still relitigate the Donovan Mitchell trade, right? People relitigate where that they should have tanked in going in 2020, 21, or even 2021, 22, right? Should they have, should they have traded out of the first round and gotten extra? But by, kind of taking a measured approach when the shit hits the fan or when things come to that point, they've had the flexibility to make those moves. And has it always been the right move? The jury's out. I mean, still, they traded 4 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, we won't have the answer to that for until April, May, June, right? Like that's we just won't have the answer for that until then. But yeah, I mean, it's just and I want to be clear. Like, I don't think like Leon is running rings around the rest of the league, and he's this genius that incomparable genius or something. But like, the plan has made sense throughout, and he's executed the plan throughout. I think he's stayed steady when he needed to stay steady. I think he's understood when to be aggressive, and all of that lines up, and it has left them in a position where, sure, they need some more depth, and I don't think that's controversial, but these pieces make sense. Their core pieces make sense together. And there are too many teams that are leveraged out in the way the Knicks are, where the core pieces don't make sense, or maybe the synergy is off, and you have got unreliable, kind of just like weird dynamics in the locker room. I mean, look, very famously, over that pygmy thing over in Brooklyn, when they got KD and Kyrie and Harden, sure, the talent was tremendous, and if they stay healthy and whatnot, sure, maybe they win a championship. But they didn't stay healthy, and then when there was adversity, when things were not smooth, it immediately went to shit. And I think that speaks not just to issues with the locker room, but there's an organizational failure when you assemble that level of talent at the price they did, and it just falls apart. I mean, they won one playoff series, and they didn't even. I mean, did they even? Harden's gone by the trade deadline of the following year after they trade for him, and then KD and Kyrie are both out at the trade deadline the year after, and like it's just crazy how fast that unraveled. Maybe that happens in New York. Maybe we're going to sit here a year from now and we'll be talking about, man, I can't believe the Knicks traded Karl-Anthony Towns for a bunch of hot air or something. Maybe that happens. I don't know. I don't anticipate it happening. Maybe it does. But on the surface, you have to feel really good, just again, about the dynamics of the team, how it's been put together, and then how they look, like how they complement each other, how they fit. And these guys are all locked in basically for the foreseeable future in terms of Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns, Josh Hart, Deuce McBride.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's pretty nice. And then you look at other teams around the league again that are leveraged out, and you don't feel that way, right? I'm watching Phoenix the other night, and I'm like, this team is a fucking mess. Like they're look, obviously Durant is still tremendous when he's healthy. Booker he's having a down year, and even his down year is still pretty fucking good. Beal is a really good scorer when he's on the floor, but he's never on the floor. Also has a no trade clause, and
Beal and Booker have not been good together.
Yeah, they've been really bad together.
Yeah,
and it's just like, and the rest of your roster is just a bunch of whatever. It's like people are gassing up getting Tyus Jones. I'm like, guys, Tyus Jones is a nice player, but he's like a guy the best thing about Tyus Jones is he's a great bench point guard. I don't think any team is like, oh man, I love Tyus Jones as our starter. And that was their big headline acquisition. And it's like, all right, well, hopefully Ryan Dunn can hit threes at a high level, and maybe Yusuf Nurkic will, be good, and it's just like it's bad, and they don't have flexibility to make moves. Or you look at a team like the Lakers in a lot of ways that are kind of stuck, and they're probably. I mean, honestly, I think they're in a better situation than a team like Phoenix for sure. But they won a championship, so them being stuck is a little bit different. But they kind of fuck up their championship window after that by not bringing back Caruso, and it feels like they've been chasing that type of player to fill in a need on the roster ever since then, unsuccessfully. And it's like that's how fleeting these moments can be, right? And I don't know if the Knicks have nailed everything. Again, like we just talked about, we won't know that for a while, but they've given themselves a real window, and other teams that are again leveraged out. It doesn't feel like there's much of a window there. I mean, look at Atlanta, who they're having a much better season this year. I think they've done a good job pivoting, but like that DeJounte Murray trade was a disaster for them. It was awful. They did nothing for 2 years, and they're still kind of having to pay the price for that because they don't control their draft capital for the next 3 years.
They pivoted well. I mean, they got
They
Dyson
did pivot
Daniels
well.
back, which is, I think, paying big dividends for them.
They pivoted well, but I'm saying because of that move, the DeJounte Murray move, they can't really go in any other path than the path they are going, where it's like, all right, well, we have to try to be competitive. That's it. Like, we don't really have an option here. And when you're kind of beholden to stuff like that, I think it limits what you can do. And
I mean, you could say the same thing about the Knicks if things really go south here, right? You have to feel good about your team. If you're gonna, eventually every team cashes in. It seems like nobody's maintaining an indefinite window of flexibility. You saw that in Golden State too, right? But
Golden State's another example where it's like they win
Steph
it.
is also, I don't want to say washed yet, but he's there. This is the first real decline I've seen from him.
Yeah, but I mean, they wasted him for the last 2 years doing nothing. They're like, oh, they won a championship, and then that was it. Like, they basically have done nothing. What moves have they made in the last years? They've done nothing. They have not been a serious team in trying to compete. It just, I don't know. I like just, and I don't. It doesn't need to just be teams that are leveraged out either. Okay, because you have these rebuilding teams where you're like, what the fuck are they doing? I mean, the one for me that I think it's crazy that nobody talks about this. And I get it. I guess they're a boring team in a boring fucking state in a boring fucking city. Like Utah, Danny Ainge he's took over 3 years ago now. So the summer of 2022, right? What does he do? He comes in, he looks at the situation. He's like, you know what? This team, we just lost in the first round to the Mavericks with Luka Doncic missing the first 3 games.
It wasn't very competitive either.
Yeah, and what we're not going anywhere. We don't have flexibility. I'm blowing this up, which is fine. I think that's like actually that was the right call. I think blowing it up was the right call. He trades Rudy Gobert for a haul, and he trades, Donovan Mitchell for a haul. At least that's what we thought at the time. Wow, great trades. Look at all these picks they got. Now they can tank.
They found a star in the Mitchell trade.
They found a star in Markkanen. And wow, this is great. What a great position Utah is in after that first year, right? I think they like won 35 games, whatever the hell it was. But they end up with the 9th pick. Do you know who the number 1 pick in that draft was?
3 years ago.
2 years ago. So after the first year together. So after they do these.
It wasn't Cade, was it?
No, it was this fella named Victor Wembanyama. You might be familiar with him.
Yeah.
they do not. So they had no. Basically, they did not tank, even though the entire plan was to tank, right?
Well, I think Markkanen was a kind of a wrench in the plan.
But you could have traded Markkanen if your plan was to tank. It's not that hard to do it. They just fumbled because why? Because Danny Ainge is greedy, and once Danny Ainge saw that Lauri Markkanen, oh man, this guy's actually pretty good. All of a sudden, oh no, he's untouchable. Oh, if you want to trade for him, you got to give us everything, right? And okay, fine. It's still not a terrible situation, right? Okay, get the 9th pick. What have they done since then? They've been drafting in the lottery for now 3 straight years. They've had multiple first-round picks, obviously aside from lottery picks, because they have those picks they got the pick from Minnesota. They have picks from Cleveland coming. They traded with the Lakers, right? They trade and they get into that Conley D'Lo trade. So they've accumulated all these assets. But in the meantime, I'm like, you've been terrible for 3 years, or this is going on the third year now. What cornerstone young player do you even have on this roster? Is there a single young player that you look at on the roster and you're like, this guy, he's definitely going to be a star level player in the foreseeable future? I don't see one. I mean, I like I like Keontae George. I think he's like an exciting player, but I don't look at him and I'm like, oh man, no way, this guy isn't a star. Cody Williams, like you can. Taylor Hendricks, hopefully he gets back on the floor. That was a brutal injury, but he wasn't even in the rotation. And then you look at some of the moves they made. Right, it's like, why did you trade for John Collins? Like, what was the point of that? You just have John Collins hanging out there. And then, you still, why is Jordan Clarkson still on this team? Why is Colin Sexton still on this team? Well, and so now it's like, I don't know. And they're terrible. They're an awful basketball team. So you're an awful basketball team. You have a bunch of guys who make no sense on an awful rebuilding basketball team.
They did beat the Knicks.
Yeah, they beat the Knicks. Congrats. And they extended Markkanen, or they renegotiated and extended his contract. But like, they are not building towards anything. It doesn't seem like. So, I mean, I'd be shocked if he's on the roster opening day next year. Like, so, and I saw a tweet yesterday where it's like, oh my God, if the Jazz, they won a game, right? They won like 2 in a row, I think. And I think it was Andy B. Larson who covers them. He tweeted something like, man, if right now the Jazz would have like the 5th best odds, so they could go as low as like the 7th pick or whatever the hell it was. And he's like, that would be a disaster for Utah. And I'm like, so you're in the 3rd year of a rebuild where you wanted to bottom out in year 1, and you're still defining success based on the lottery odds of your draft pick? Like, that's awful. And you don't have a young player that I think anybody looks at and is like, oh man, this kid is going to be awesome. That seems like a terrible, terrible job that Danny Ainge has done. But he won't get any criticism for it, and nobody will say shit, and nobody will talk about it because, oh, well, he's got so many picks, and oh, look at all these young guys they drafted, and oh, well, they're going to trade Laurie, and they're going to get another haul for Laurie. And it's like, look, getting all these hauls is fantastic, but actually, like, fielding a competitive team is also an important component of running a basketball franchise. And, I think Presti, I think sometimes people go overboard with praising him, but like, once he kind of realized SGA was a guy, they've been pretty judicious about putting pieces around him. And look, they've drafted fairly well, right? They've drafted Chet at 3. I'm not going to sing their praises for that, or whatever, at 2. I'm not going to sing their praises for that. But like Jalen Williams at 12, Cason Wallace, whatever. Like, they've done a good job of assembling pieces.
It helps to have a million picks though, because the pick before Jalen Williams is Ousmane Dieng, right? So, which
once a Nick, always a Nick, Ousmane Dieng. But like, I just think like, you don't get good by accident. Like, I don't think that's real. Like, I don't buy the whole like, well, it's just luck, just lottery luck, because if that's like to use a cross sports comparison, Andrew Luck was like considered the greatest quarterback prospect ever, right? Like, or like the best one since Peyton Manning. He gets drafted by the Colts, and his career is over within what, like, was it, how many years did he play? 8 years? Something like that?
I mean, he was really good.
Yeah, he was really good, but why does his career end early? Because they did a terrible job of protecting him. And like,
he played 2012, 2018, and then he didn't play at all in 2017. So he was on the field for 6 seasons.
Yeah, and it's like, Trevor Lawrence, he's this generational quarterback prospect. He gets drafted by the Jaguars, who are fucking awful. And he doesn't look like a generational quarterback prospect anymore. Is that on him? Is it on the organization? I don't know, but I'm saying bad teams, poorly run teams, it doesn't matter what talent they have. They're going to fuck it up some way. Now, I don't know about Danny Ainge. Like, I don't know what he's doing over there. I do know this. I do know that when he left Boston, he left on a low. That was a team that looked very disappointing after the 2020-2021 season. It was a team that it felt like they had fucked up a window where they had all these picks and all this talent and whatever, and he had never had the balls to push his chips in and make championship winning moves. And unfortunately for us as Knicks fans, he is then replaced by Brad Stevens, who within 2 years of taking the job won a championship because he had a clear cut idea of what he wanted to build towards. And that was that, right? Like it's just, or sorry, within 3 years, I should say, they won a championship. But they went to a finals in his first year. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals his second year, and then they win the championship last year. Like, to me, that's a pretty good indication that Danny Ainge might be great at accumulating assets, but I don't think that guy. I think he's lost his fastball. He's not a guy that knows how to build a contender anymore, in my opinion, and that's bearing out to me in Utah because he's not made difficult moves. Like if you want to build around Markkinen because he's a star and you were surprised by how good he was, that's cool. You should probably actually try to do that then. And they're just not. They're not trying. They're not trying to do anything. They're just standing around drafting guys. Oh, let's trade for John Collins. Let's fucking Walker Kessler. We need 17 first round picks for him. Like this is not a real plan. This is not good execution, and this is not a good rebuild. It's an awful one, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I feel like Danny Ainge, it's a little bit like me in fantasy football. I kept Brian Thomas Jr. as like my fourth or fifth wide receiver, and I got some offers, but I was like, nah, this guy's too good, and ended up he was on my bench more often than not, right? So, I don't think I'm as probably as good a GM as Danny Ainge, but I think you
much
hold
better. You're much better.
you hold on to your assets too long. That's what happened. It's interesting you mentioned the Jazz. I just Googled them, and the first link that pops up is from SLC Dunk, and it's apparently the Utah Jazz only have concepts of a rebuild plan. One thing you didn't mention, apparently they were all in on Bridges, on trying to get Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, I know that was a report. I think that's bullshit. Like what I think was happening was he was trying to drive the price up on us because then he was hoping, okay, well if this price is high for Bridges, let me see if there's a team that's willing to give me that price for Markkinen. Because if you remember, the Markkinen thing was weird this offseason because they couldn't extend him until like August, whatever the fuck it was, and they engaged in trade talks for him. They were open to offers. The Warriors thing, there was a whole thing about the Warriors trying to get him. So like that's what I think was happening. There was like a little bit of a 4D chess move attempt by him. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, whatever it was, I think that's part of it. Although it does seem like the recent kind of resurgence of Bridges has not made waves because they're still like he broke his shooting form before the season. His defensive upside has been underwhelming. I think that's both are fair to say, maybe to an extent, but doesn't seem like they're aware of the last few games. I think we do the same thing with other teams too. But it's there's a lot to get right with it's really hard. So there's a difference between being risk averse and just sitting on assets that age too much, right? I think Rose has struck the right balance. And yeah, I think it goes to I think the big lessons learned, I think, is it's very difficult to build with your idea that some 19, 20, 21-year-old is going to save. And I think you were mentioning this, right? Like the rookies the Knicks have drafted, they've given them the space and time to like find their niche. But what they've also done is, a lot of those teams we talked about, Minnesota, New Orleans, Utah, whatever. Utah's not this. That's a different case. But a lot of these teams, they draft the guy, and then they say, now we'll add in veteran role players around you, right? The Knicks have found veteran stars and have plugged around them role players that are either vets or they have used the young kids to plug in those roles. And I think a lot of the criticism has been, you pigeonhole these role players, right? They don't develop the other skills. I also think that's untrue. Say what you want about how real it is with RJ Barrett. And maybe the Knicks should have given him more leeway, but it certainly didn't seem to hurt his development. I mean, he's now thriving with more usage. I don't think it hurt his development. Quickly before he got hurt in last year was having a lot of success in that role, offensively at least. Grimes even on ball in Dallas, right, with more on ball opportunities. So. I mean, I think I've been thinking about this a little bit more and more, and I think ultimately, in a lot of sports, right, there's this idea of the QB whisperer, right? Like, here's an example, right? Jim Harbaugh had this reputation as being a QB whisperer, right? San Diego gets Josh Johnson, who he turned into a pro. Obviously, did good work with Luck. And then in San Francisco, he was there, to kind of rebuild Alex Smith, and then coach Kaepernick to a lot of success. He goes to Michigan. He doesn't really there wasn't a good QB prospect really until McCarthy. There wasn't really, I don't think anyone, maybe Rudock got drafted, but he was a transfer, right?
Well, Patterson was pretty well regarded, right, when he came in, but
he didn't get drafted. So you can't say Harbaugh is this QB whisperer.
Yeah.
So why did it work with McCarthy? Because that guy, from all reports, just had insane work ethic and was just
obsessed. Let's not gloss over Cade McNamara, okay?
Anyway, I mean, he won a championship with Cade, but I can't say that he.
That's like actually the greatest thing. That's probably his greatest accomplishment as a coach.
Beat Ohio State with maybe
without a quarter, with me and you at quarterback.
But that
was I think that they accomplished again this season. Great job.
Yeah, even less of a quarterback. But that kind of made me question, like, how much of it is just the individual, just, hey, you find a guy you find Andrew Luck. It's not to say that Harbaugh doesn't play a role there. And I think it's the same thing. Like, Tibbs was a guy, he doesn't play young players. Those guys developed. It was actually thinking in my head, because I think XJ from Hot Hand Theory posted, it was about I forget what young player he's talking about. Some players not getting, or Keon Ellis, right? Keon Ellis isn't going to get minutes. An injury is going to force them to play him, and then the coach is going to get credit for his development, like Tibbs did with Quickly. That was what was implied. I was just like, I don't think he plays as big a role in player development as people who give him credit for suggest. And he probably isn't. I don't think not playing young players is as actively detrimental. Ultimately, so much of it is on that player. And we're like, oh, he didn't go to the right fit. We talk about these things. I'm not dismissing the role of them, but I think the general discourse has overplayed them. The idea of these young whisperers, right? A lot of it is just, yeah, you put in guys who build a player's confidence, but most of it is on them. And the Knicks have been, and that again, I do think Tibbs gives the right structure. I do think ultimately his system and those things is good for young players, but he's not going to Pacom Dadier's house every night to like coach him up and watch film with him, or like do individual. That's this romanticized idea that ultimately it's on the player more than, and getting that right guy matters more than, and it's really hard because a lot of times these are 19-year-old kids. And that's, like, I thought Zion had all the makeup to be the next superstar. I was super in on Zion. Hasn't turned out that way, and some of it is bad luck, but some of it is on him. And a lot of it is things that they have to learn over time. Another reason why betting your franchise on that quickly happening for a 22, 23-year-old guy, that's one way to go. The Knicks have chosen this other path, and it has allowed them to create the situation. It has allowed them to create the situation for young players to develop, because they're not asked to immediately carry the weight on their shoulders. And they've found the kind of guys who are willing to learn a role. And then the other thing is, I think probably another thing that gets overstated is how pigeonholed a guy gets, like I was saying before. So those, like, you, just because you learn to be a 3-and-D player doesn't mean that, because the reality is everyone is doing more things, right? If you are a 3-and-D role player like Mikal Bridges, you're still doing stuff off the dribble. If you are an on-ball,
or like cutting, you can't just be a stationary guy out there anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, if you wanted, like, Bridges was that guy in Phoenix, he was able to scale up and explore that part of his game in Brooklyn too. And it's not like because he had done 3-and-D in Phoenix, he couldn't do that, right? A guy like Quickly, yeah, he was an on-ball point guard. He had to develop lots of off-ball skills too. And it's not like it precluded him from being either of those roles on another team. So I think those are the kind of things in the conversation around young players, especially as we've heard them around the Knicks, that I think there's a lot of misconceptions around player development. Not necessarily that these ideas are completely wrong, but just the weighting we give to all of them. I think the Knicks have explored different paths, and it to me it's definitely changed the conversation in my mind.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to think about. The thing with player development, I mean, I actually pulled up that that Jazz article that you talked about. But like the hard thing I think for fans is and organizations too, I'm sure, is understanding like, okay, we have a plan for development. How do we stick to that? And also like you can't just have a development plan that is the same for everybody, right? People are different, human beings are different, players are different, they have different skill set, they have different holes in their game, there's different things that they need to work on, and how that, how do you develop that within a team setting? I think what's frustrating is just like when the development plan for a player is kind of muddled, but then also, well, it's not straightforward, let's just say, because they are, obviously a developing project player, let's call it. But then you're also like, well, what? How does not playing this guy right now line up with what we're trying to achieve as an organization? And this is something that like was frustrating for us back in 2021-22, right? Where we're like, if you're like, the reason why it was so frustrating at the time was we were like, actually, if you want to win, you should play the young guys more because they're better. Like they're better. Like Quickly is better than Kemba Walker, right? Quickly is better a point guard than Alec Burks. Grimes can play defense. You should probably stick him on the floor a bit. And that was like why it was so
Maybe
frustrating.
even who are the centers? Because Mitch got hurt, right? That
It was
season.
Sims and Noel, but Noel
Yeah,
was
so that was another thing.
Gibson. Yeah,
I wanted
Gibson
them to play Sims more than certainly Noel, right? So like that's
and
another thing,
Taj
right?
and
Yeah.
Taj. And it was like, so you got these weird things, and I like you look at this Utah thing, and this guy talks about it in the article where he's like, I'll just read the paragraph because it's actually fucking hilarious. Um, but games like the last two, where the Jazz have had bad wins that have dropped them in the lottery, could have been losses had the Jazz not been playing Colin Sexton and John Collins big minutes. Someone, please enlighten me on what the Jazz gained by random wins over the Dallas Mavericks, Detroit Pistons, and Brooklyn Nets because of John Collins and Colin Sexton. I'm serious. I don't understand. What did they gain? Please let me know in the comments. But that's where I think you get the most frustration from fans, where it's like look, if you're telling us that we're rebuilding, that's fine. But like, can you do shit that makes sense then in a rebuild? I mean, we experienced this for how many years with the Knicks, where we're like, okay, you're telling me that you're doing this whole youth development and rebuilding thing. Why is Jared Jack starting and playing like 38 minutes? Why is that happening? Like, what's the plan with that?
Why is Enes Kanter playing over Mitchell Robinson, right? Stuff like
Yeah,
that. I mean, which they
yeah,
changed, but like, that took a while, right? So
yeah. And it's like, yeah, it's like your actions are not lining up with your words. And we don't know the internal dynamics of various
I was gonna
organizations.
I was gonna say that. I think the reason why there's often that exact mismatch, right? Play the young kids on, is because still veterans carry some weight in that locker room, and it's easy for us to say when it's just
Well,
numbers on it's just names on a sheet. It's different when you're dealing with those. It's like at a workplace, right? So
it's like we know just what we talked about with Leon, or like how he's been good at like managing, like he treats the people like people, right? It's not like just, oh, you're just here and that's it. Like I'm like, you're just an asset to me, right? It's not that type of necessarily mindset. Um, but like I think what we also don't know, you talk about locker room dynamics, but we don't know what the pressures are from ownership, right? And ownership can be fickle. They can change their mind. It can be like, hey, we like that was what happened with the process, really, right? It's like Hinkie had this plan, ownership signed off on this plan, and then the optics got bad because of the way the plan was being executed and the fact that Hinkie was apparently an asshole to agents. Every agent fucking hated him. Like because of that. And that those pressures, right, from the league, from agents And just this stuff like, if you're a billionaire owner and you hang out with other billionaire owners and they're going to like be like, hey, your team fucking blows, dude. What's going on there? Huh? Like that stuff gets to you and that can change the dynamics internally because all of a sudden you're like, hey, you know what? I know I told you that we were cool tanking for another year, but I'm going to need to see some results on the floor this time around, actually. So just letting you know, that's the plan now. And we don't know how, like, so maybe Utah, for all I know, maybe their attendance has plummeted and now their ownership is like, yeah, hey, you know what? This rebuild sounded great in theory, but we want you to try and get some wins here because we gotta get people in the stadium and put out a product on the floor that they can be proud
Get
of.
them jazzed about the team.
Yeah.
It could also be Ainge trying to pump up the trade value for Collins
Right.
and Sexton, right?
Yeah, it could be any number of things. And so it's a really like weird thing. But at some point, you have to make logical choices and you have to make choices that move the needle one way or the other. If you want to tank. If you want to be competitive. Like the Knicks were pretty transparent throughout that, like, I think that first year they would have been comfortable tanking, but as soon as it was obvious that they were too competent for that, it was like, okay, we're
They
gonna
get their
try to
pros, right?
yeah, we're gonna let's try to get the backup. Let's get another ball handler in here that can help us out and won't cost too much, and let's just see what happens this season. Like they and obviously since that point they've been pretty transparent about like, no, we want to establish a baseline of competence and then we will try to level up when we can level up. You have to be like, you have to, I think fans can get frustrated when that transparency, I mean, even then people were frustrated with the Knicks, right? At that time it was like, what the fuck, what's the point of this? We're just this middling team. What is our path to doing anything? So even if you're executing a plan and you're transparent about what that plan is, if you're not executing, or if you're not, if your well laid plans are not delivering on the results that you expect, that's going to be frustrating to fans and they're going to be vocal about it. But like in this case with the Jazz, I think the fans are totally accurate in terms of like, what is the fucking plan here? Because we're like, are we just going to fuck over our chances of getting Cooper Flag at the top of this draft? If you view him as a generational type prospect, I have no idea. I have not watched any footage of Cooper Flag. I'm just saying if that's like the kind of prevailing narrative around him, um, and your plan has been to rebuild via the draft, this seems like a draft you probably want to tank in, or you want to at least maximize your chances of getting pick odds. And if you, let's say you like, it's frustrating to win games with veterans that are not part of your long term future in any way, shape, or form. And when you're riding those players to victories, right? Like I very specifically remember a game in 2020, 2021. That was the first year with Leon Rose and Tibbs. We played Minnesota, actually, funny enough. And he played Elfrid Payton like 38 minutes in that game. It was just this miserable slog of a game. I think Todd Gibson played a shit ton of minutes, and the Knicks lost. And what was frustrating to me is I was like, even if you won this game, this was such a shitty win because like you rode these vets who are clearly worse than the young players that are on your roster and available to play. Like what? Like so, if the Jazz, right, if they bench Colin Sexton, bench John Collins, or trade them, or whatever happens, and then they're playing the young guys, and they won the same exact games they won these last two games, I think their fans would be completely fine with that. It's not just about like, well, we want to tank, so we want to tank. It's about playing the guys that actually make sense to that matter to your future, that are relevant to what you're trying to build. And it's, I can see to me, it'd be frustrating when I know as a fan of, if I was a Utah fan, I would know that Colin Sexton exists right now to be traded at some point in time. John Collins exists on this roster to be traded at some point in time, right? Like the Jordan Clarkson exists on this roster to be traded at some point in time. Walker Kessler might exist in this roster to be traded at some point in time. But at least if I play him, maybe he plays really well and that changes my opinion. And now he becomes a piece of your core. But like none of these decisions are aligning, right? They're not aligning with any specific vision. And that's tough. And that's where a lot of NBA teams end up, right? Like where you're you don't quite know which way you want to go. And yeah, I mean, with like the Pelicans, it was always a weird one where they get all these assets for Anthony Davis, so you want to do this rebuild, but then you get Zion, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess we need to. And Ingram was already a very talented player, so you're like, okay, well, we don't need to rebuild. Actually, we just need to retool around these guys. Okay, but how are you retooling? And then I'll never forget this. The funniest thing I always thought that I remember reading about was like they traded Drew Holiday, right? Because they're like, all right, well, he's not really on the timeline with these guys, so let's cash in, let's get what we can from him. They got they got like 3 first-round picks unprotected, I think, from Milwaukee or whatever it was. They got a pretty big haul for Drew Holiday. But I remember like a year later, and they get Bledsoe back, right? And I think like a year later, I remember reading like, oh yeah, they really want like they need a strong lead guard there that can help organize their team. And I'm like,
Alfred Payton.
Yeah, right. But I was like, didn't you just trade that guy? Like you just traded that guy, right? And then they end up doing like going for CJ McCollum and whatever. And it's just, again, I don't think you get good by accident. And when you consistently make decisions that you then have to later correct, I think that speaks to poor management. And that's been kind of the entirety of David Griffin's time there, where it's like, it always feels like he's trying to rectify a mistake that he just made.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, I will say it shows that like also just get a bunch of young guys and have them figure it out, and don't like get a bunch of young talented guys that are high picks and have them figured out. Sometimes it works out great, right? Chet, Jalen Williams, these Dort, I guess if you still want to include him as a young guy, these guys all fit well together, right? Zion and Ingram just never really fit that way. Neither one of them commits very consistently to defense. I think, neither one of them is a pure playmaker in that sense. I had hopes for Zion being that, and it's still early in his career. And neither one of them is a great floor spacer. In Ingram's case, I think it's very much more by choice and play style than his actual ability. But that becomes so. Then you have to kind of figure that out. The Knicks drafted an imperfect, talented young player in RJ Barrett, who didn't fit with Randall. They end up moving both of them, right, without tanking their value, of course. We just, at some point, I think it's past overdue, that conversation with Ingram. And it's tough. I mean, it's tough because Ingram and Zion might have a great relationship, and they might have a great relationship with the front office. And Ingram, came from Coach K's program. Maybe you believe in him, So
I'm not sure. I feel like Ingram doesn't look like he spends as much time in restaurants as Zion. I'm not sure how great their relationship is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of. I mean, I don't want to understate how difficult this stuff is, but that should speak to just because the Knicks have won. I think you talked about the Nets before, and this is going to sound corny or whatever, but like I think it matters to me that like even through all of the cycles of this team, they're still eminently likable guys, right? I think like when the Nets traded, even when the they first got Harden and Kyrie, obviously I have friends that are Nets fans in real life. They're shockingly not like people you meet online that are Nets fans, and actually fun to talk hoop with. But they had said that we came up with D'Lo, rehabilitating his career. We came up with Brook Lopez, who's still beloved by a lot of Nets fans. Came up with Dinwiddie, right, who gave them that edge. And as much as for all the reasons we hated Dinwiddie, or at least I did, and still kind of do, that's what made him endearing to Nets fans. They traded that, and it felt like, I think to them, a little bit selling your soul. And they're like, yeah, I get it. We have 3 of the most amazing players on the planet now. It is kind of nice that the Knicks have, when they have done those moves, like when I think you said this, when they traded quickly, it's like, yeah, we're selling our souls for mercenary basketball. OG has been a pretty good personality.
Yeah, he's been great. Look, man, I was off that take.
I'm not trying to shit on. I'm not trying to.
No. I own that. Like, I definitely said that, and I probably ranted about it for like the day in between, the trade and actually. Then I watched OG play basketball for like 5 minutes. I was like, this is a fucking awesome trade, Leon Rose. You have done wonders. But like, yeah,
and we the things we've heard about players, right? from other on you hear OG, he's frustrated with his role, doesn't just is not maybe the best locker room guy in Toronto. That hasn't turned out to be true, right? We heard Cat was soft and clashed with Tibbs and corny weird dude, right? Like not a guy, like not a serious guy. Comes here, he's look pretty damn serious, right? But the guys they've added and continue to add, even as we say goodbye to some of these younger guys who at a different time in this era were really guys we kind of we fell in love with and really loved rooting for. I think it matters a little bit that one, it to me as a fan, that these guys are also the new guys that are coming in are also really fun to root for, in addition to being really fucking good at basketball. But I think it also speaks to just being an agent, and like Rose does have relationships with all these guys, and they call it nepotism. But if the guy is going to be serious, if there's going to be, if he's a high maintenance person with baggage, right? If he's going to stick to a diet, if he's going to put in the extra hour, extra 2 hours, working out, if he's going to put in the time in recovery and take care of himself. Those relationships, the things that every cynical writer like to write about Leon Rose, it's just to star fuck, right? That he's a nepotism guy. He got Brunson because of CAA. He's favorable to Randall because of CAA. All these things. Well, I think that the fact that he has these personal relationships and has the ability to learn a lot about a person has helped, because I think it matters that the Knicks have. I don't want to question anyone's character on these losing teams, but I can say the Knicks, when they get these guys, they have a very clear idea of how they're going to approach every day when they come to work. And that as much as the talent evaluation, the cap management, the team fit and all that has mattered, so does that. And you see that in some of these other places where it's not to say that that's the reason why the Pelicans or any other team is failing, but knowing your personnel is pretty important. I do want to, we haven't talked too much about the actual game with the Pelicans. I do want to say, they had that the beginning of the third quarter was disastrous. They go down 14, I think, at one point.
62 to 48.
And then Brunson was 3 for 6 from the field at that point. And I was like, all right, Cat is in a different place tonight. Buddy, I have sympathy for asking too much, but also you had a bad game against Minnesota. Cat kind of picked you up and put up a big show that night, right? Now it's time to return the favor. And like the instant, I think I said that on the Discord, Brunson just goes on fire. And the thing is, we've been on the other side of that so many times, right? I feel like this happened every time we used to play Steph Curry when the Knicks were bad or like rebuilding. I feel like it always used to happen against Kyrie Irving. It still does at times. But
Kyrie legitimately just like owns the Knicks. It's very frustrating.
But especially Steph, it felt like there were so many games, maybe it was only 2 or 3, but I remember so many games against the Warriors, or the Warriors were this dynasty or a really good team, and the Knicks, hey, they're keeping with them. They're taking a lead. Wow, we might actually win in Oracle. And then Steph for like 1 quarter you probably hear it it was probably the same conversation Tibbs had with Brunson. It's like, all right, dude, just give me like 10 minutes of like, just be the guy. And then the person does it, and then the game is over, right? After the Knicks took a 10-point lead, and it's like, all right, it's it's done at this point. So it was pretty awesome to be on the other side of that. And to have multiple guys, and I think it's great that Brunson doesn't have to do that every night, but still can. And I personally think that the Knicks should have 2 all-star starters. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. A good point you brought up about like picking each other up when the other guys maybe doesn't have it. And I think with Brunson, he's always. I think right now he's. You talked about the Bridges thing earlier, where it's like Kat talked about how it's on them to kind of like do a better job of getting him going. I think Brunson is conscious of that. And I think, look, he's not, we know, look, at his core, right? What is Jalen Brunson? He is a scorer, right? That's what he is. He's a really, really talented scorer. Doesn't mean he's selfish, doesn't mean he can't pass, but his primary strength as a player is his scoring ability. So I think for him, like his he's geared to be a scorer, right? But he knows now, okay, I'm playing with Cat, I'm playing with Bridges, like I got to get these guys involved. He's very conscious of like needing to set them up. And I think at times it kind of fucks up his own process and it actually makes him worse at setting guys up or scoring or being effective and kind of understanding when to impose himself on the game. And that's still a growing process that they're going through. But like, but you've seen that, right? And you mentioned like, okay, Cat got into foul trouble and didn't have his best game, and Brunson at some point was like, all right, fuck this, I gotta, it's time, like I gotta just step up here and make this happen. And that's like the cat has had performances like that, right? Where it's like, oh, tonight's my night, and credit to the Knicks when when Cat's rolling, they kind of understand that and have done a really good job of getting him the ball in dangerous positions, and that's a credit to Tibbs too, right? I think the job that he's done in terms of like constructing this offense with Brunson at the 1 and Cat at the 5 and all these other different pieces has been really, really good, and probably doesn't get enough credit for it, even from Knicks fans, to be honest. I think Tibbs is coached. I think what he's getting these guys to do offensively is really impressive. And also just a massive shift from what we're accustomed to, right? From Tibbs and his offenses historically. But yeah, I mean, like, should the Knicks have 2 All-Star starters? I don't know, maybe, but they definitely should have 2 All-Stars, and I think they will. Like, I'm pretty confident Brunson will make it and Cat will make it. I'd be.
So I think Cat is pretty much locked in. I think it's a start.
I think Brunson's locked in too. I think
Brunson's
no,
as a starter. I mean,
yeah,
I think he's definitely a starter. Like there's Tatum and Giannis, and then there's nobody else who comes close to Cat right now.
Yeah, the East, because Embiid he's not gonna qualify, and there's no way that he's gonna be a starter. And yeah, I mean, for the All-Star starters in the East at the guard position, I think it's like,
I would take Brunson personally, but it's between him, Mitchell, Garland, and what?
And Dame.
I saw somebody had Trey starting, which
I don't hate that. I mean, look, I think I personally would still take Brunson. I understand the cup game is going to be like, oh, look at what happened when they played heads up and the Hawks are 2-0 against them, whatever. Like that's all fine and good and dandy. But like, I would still take Brunson. But I think Trey deserves credit this year. Like he's genuine, and I know his percentages are god awful. I don't know what the hell is going on with him there, but he is the driving force of that offense, and his distributing this year has been phenomenal. I mean, I think he's averaging what, like 12 and a half assists or something a game. He's been really nutty. If people voted for Trey or Mitchell or whoever, Dame,
Mitchell, I think it should be. I think it's. I would pick Mitchell and Brunson. I think those are just the 2 best players. For whatever reason, I think people are kind of downplaying Mitchell's season. I wouldn't. I mean, we joke about Brunson owning Mitchell in the playoffs. I think those 2 guys are neck and neck, very even, especially with Mitchell kind of taking another leap on defense. But people, Dame and Brunson, I think have pretty identical numbers. And then you have Garland is weirdly getting a lot more credit than Mitchell, I think, for the Cavs' success. And then
I feel like it's like an overcorrection to
shitting on him last year.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what that is. But I mean, he's played better. And honestly, look, if the Cavs are, what are they, fucking 22-4, or whatever their fucking record is, if they get 2 starters, I don't think it's, and whoever that may be.
Well, I think the shock would be if they don't get either one, right? Which is certainly possible as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine Mitchell will make it because he's always got like he's a good highlight player too, right? He's an explosive guy, so he tends to get a lot of
liked by fans also.
Yeah. So I think he'll get it. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that close. I think it should be Cat, but there are people that are like, oh, well, Mobley maybe deserves to start too. So I mean,
had a fantastic season, by the way.
And I'll be completely honest with you, I don't really give a shit about All-Star. I cared about it when it was like last year because I thought it was very obvious that Brunson should have started and that Dame starting was a fucking joke over him. But like, I guess the best way to put this is the Knicks are really good now, and I am at the point where like I know these guys are going to get various individual accolades, right? All-Star, All-NBA, whoever. I mean, maybe you get an All-Defense with OG or whatever it is. All these guys are going to get varying degrees of individual accolades. but like we're at a point now where I don't think we need to. And I'm not saying you're doing this or anybody. I mean, I get why fans care about this stuff, but we're at a point now with this team where like I don't really give a shit about that. Like I expect that because this team is really good, and all that I really care about is stay healthy, keep ironing out various things that you need to iron out offensively, defensively, whatever, and let's be ready for May, June basketball and see what happens because that's really it. Like this team is, we know what they are. We know they're really good. We know they're going to be in the playoffs, and we don't really need to like and because they're really good and they're going to be a playoff team, whatever. It comes with how do you become a playoff team? How do you become a really good team and a contender? You have to have players that are among the best in the business, and obviously, if you're among the best in the business, you're going to get those individual awards. So I'm not even worried about it because it's just going to happen. Be it all-star starter or they get picked up, come off the bench. I don't really give a fuck. I just care about let's get to the postseason healthy, all in one piece, and let's see what this team can do at that time. All right, I think that's a.
I do want to add there. I think we mentioned the defensive rating is 13th. Now I would take that a bit with a grain of salt, just because they haven't faced a lot of high-powered offenses, and I think the ones they do still have some success. I really liked what they did against Denver, but also Denver is a team with its own issues. So I am curious to see how it holds up against better offenses. But I think you can't deny that the improvement on defense is very real. Not just, I mean, Bridges has improved for sure. Cat as well. I think they've been core to the Knicks finding some measure of respectability on that end.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just in terms of that specifically, which I think is a fair thing to bring up. These are teams they have lost to this year. Okay, Detroit 19th in offensive rating, Atlanta 20th in offensive rating, and Utah 24th in offensive rating. And those were teams that put up big numbers on us, right? I think the Hawks in the first game they played us, they put up 121.
That is weird. They're 20th because they're but I guess they're doing it with defense this year more, and they're also just not that good. But
the Hawks are also outperforming their net rating by a pretty significant margin,
and they're still 14-15.
Yeah,
right? So
Detroit, they put up 120 on us at the Garden, and then Utah put up whatever the hell it was, 100 and I don't know, felt like 150 in Utah. So I agree to your point that the Knicks haven't faced exactly their stiffest test in terms of facing quality offenses. But I think given that we saw them capitulate against poor offenses earlier in the season, the fact that they're now consistently able to keep those teams, not just constantly racking up the points on the scoreboard, keep them in check. I think that's a pretty good sign as well. So
yeah, and they added Landry Shamet, so hopefully that helps bolster the depth a little bit. Not even that Shamet is some lockdown defender, but keeping the top line of wings fresh.
I think just having a guy who has a quick trigger from three is valuable. They don't necessarily have that, so I think he's like a kind of one of those unconscious type shooters where it's just like if he's open, there's no hesitation, right? If he has airspace, there's no hesitation. He's going to pull the trigger. All right. I think that's a decent place to end it. Stacy, let the people know they can find you and plug anything you'd like to plug.
Stacy Patton 89 on Twitter, X. I think we have some holiday content coming out, so check that out. And exciting week for the Knicks coming up. Tonight we got the Raptors, so that's always a fun reunion. I don't know if RJ is going to play. I know he's dealing with an illness. But last time, obviously, there were some fireworks from him. It'll be interesting to see, he's back at the Garden. And then you have Christmas. That's going to be a lot of fun. I think I will be stressed during it. But the Spurs are actually kind of good now. I think they're above 500. And the last time they played, we remember how awesome that battle was. And now you add Cat to the mix against Wemby. Should be a fun week. Oh yeah, and there's a whole Christmas thing. So hope you guys all have Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Yeah, and I'm going to plug personally, so check out all the work of Strickland. Hopefully the Knicks take care of business tonight against the Raptors, who should be shorthanded. I think Jakob Poeltl is out. RJ Barrett might be out. He had an illness. He missed their game yesterday. We know how RJ is coming off of illnesses as well, so maybe you want him to play. I don't know. I do think it's unfortunate that Quickly is out, and maybe RJ's out too. It's always kind of nice to see young guys that had their development in New York come back and see where they're at. But yeah, that's not going to happen today. And then we have the Christmas game at noon against the Spurs, which should be fun because Wembanyama is playing some great basketball right now. All right, that is our show for today. I hope everybody has a great week. I hope everybody has a great holidays, safe holidays, and I will see you on Friday. Thank you to our sponsor, Bet Online. Peace.